All right, well, good morning, everyone. It's so nice to have a good turnout and participation for these virtual events. It's been interesting to try to put some stuff together while the North Carolina room is closed. Reference is almost always in person, so being away from the library has been challenging, but it looks like we're slowly going to start coming back in here soon, but we'll continue virtual programming throughout the summer. So keep an eye out on our social media, our blog, and just watch out for anything that is coming as far as virtual programming goes. One of the things we're going to try to do is keep pushing forward with our Black Asheville History Project initiative, and doing these virtual meetings is a great way to continue to do that, despite the fact that we can't have our planned history harvest for the spring and summer. So if you, like I've said a couple of times, if you have questions, you can type them in the chat as we're going along. I'll try to keep an eye out if you have something specific that you'd like to ask while the presentation is happening. But otherwise, at the end, we'll have some time for question and answer. And if you have a question, you can use that raise hand function, or just type it into the chat or say, you know, I'd like to ask my question out loud. So just let me know when we get to that point in time. So for those of you who don't know me, I am Catherine Cutshaw. I'm the collections manager here in the North Carolina room at Pack Memorial Library. If you've never visited us before, hopefully you will be able to do that soon. We are downstairs at Pack Library at 67 Haywood Street in downtown Asheville. We have a huge collection of books and manuscript materials. I think the last time I looked, we're just shy of 20,000 photographs in our catalog. So we have a ton of stuff for folks who are researching their family histories. So today we're going to talk a little bit about researching the genealogies of African American folks from Western North Carolina. We get a lot of questions about this, and that has been more and more frequent now that we've started in on the Black Asheville History Project. This is something that we have been working on for the past couple of years. We got started with our first program really in April 2019, but there'd been a lot of build up to that. And that was a presentation of research from one of our librarians about the teachers at Stevens Lee High School in the later years of the school. I think it was between 1965 and 1968 when integration happened that we really investigated the teachers there and presented that back in May. And since then, we've been working with different groups and community members, mainly the Buncombe County Community Engagement Team, which is part of the Office of Strategic Partnerships, to reach out to folks and build up our African American archival materials. Right now, our African American materials comprise less than 2% of our entire collection, which is huge. So our goal over the next 5 years is to, it's very audacious, but to increase that number to 25% of our total collection. That way we have a more representative archive here. But the North Carolina room is Buncombe County's public archive. So we are so happy to take in materials of all kinds of people, and we really want our archive to be more representative of the community we live in. So any minority communities, if you have some materials you'd like to share with us, let us know. We have a pretty sizable LGBT collection. I'd like to start working with some folks in our Latinx community to see what things are out there. So if you have some leads, be sure to let us know. So I'll go ahead, I'm going to share my screen and get started on our presentation. Oops. Okay. Oh goodness, I'm going backwards here. Okay, so today we're going to talk about, like I said before, researching enslaved and formerly enslaved ancestors from Western North Carolina. And this is good information for anyone who's researching an individual or family. The kinds of records that we have for white folks are going to be a lot more abundant, and there are going to be some differences in how you might go about looking for some of the records for these African American ancestors. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. I'm going to use an example of somebody who I've researched before. Her name was Sarah Gudger. Sarah was born in Buncombe County or McDowell County, we're not entirely sure, sometime around 1816. Sarah was interviewed by the Federal Writers Project, a New Deal program, in 1937. And in 1937, Sarah claimed to be 121 years old. So she just stuck out to me as a really interesting figure. Around the time of the interview and when she passed away in 1938, there was a lot about her out in the news, remarking on her age, her experiences, the fact that she had been interviewed by the Federal Writers Project. And one of the things that makes Sarah really particularly special is that she is one of the only people we know of from Buncombe County who gave an interview of her experiences during slavery, or while she was enslaved. There were several other interviews taken in Asheville, but the folks who were interviewed had relocated here from elsewhere. So Sarah is really the example of a woman who had been enslaved in Buncombe County. I'm going to take a second and show you, let's see, this virtual website, virtual exhibit. Oh, let's see. Sorry, this screen sharing thing's a little clunky. Oh, it's not wanting to let me click. Okay, there we go. So this is a virtual exhibit called Sarah Gudger's Journey to Freedom. This is something I worked on several years ago, but what's nice about it is that it kind of explains all of the different types of resources my research partner and I used to learn more about Sarah. I really encourage you to take a look through this. It's really a lot of fun to click on the different interactive bits and pieces here. There are maps that show where Sarah lived and different points along the Buncombe Turnpike, which is a big part of this. But definitely take some time to look at this. You can find it by just doing a quick Google search for Sarah Gudger's Journey to Freedom, and typically it's the very first search result. But Sarah was a particularly good example because we have so much information about her, not only the information that she shared about herself in her interview, but we were able to use the information that she shared in her interview to find more and more information. So, wish there was an easier way to go back and forth between the PowerPoint, but. So Sarah Gudger presented some really interesting challenges, and these are some lessons and challenges that anyone who is researching African Americans in Western North Carolina or anywhere else are going to run into. So it's nice to go ahead before you get started to think about some of these things. Number one is don't assume anything. Even if you think that you have found the ultimate source, you should try to back it up 3 or 4 different times. Something we ran into with the Sarah Gudger project was a bill of sale for a Sarah to a man named Gudger, or Hemphill rather, who she had described living with, but in her interview she hadn't said that she had ever been sold. We, after looking into the bill of sale a little bit more, we discovered that it couldn't have been for Sarah, though there was much fanfare around the fact that it could have been. So if you come across something that just seems too good to be true, assume that it probably is and try to verify and re-verify those sources. And along that same vein, keep an open mind. You may not find things in places where you were expecting to find them. So for instance, here recently, we found some really great sources related to Asheville and Buncombe County in the special collections at UMass Amherst. These were some papers in the W.E.B. Du Bois collection, and Massachusetts is one of the last places that I might go looking for information about Asheville. So definitely just keep an open mind when you're looking for different people and explore all different kinds of possibilities. Employ all of your available resources. And there are more than you think out there. And if you're running into troubles, you're hitting a roadblock, it's kind of odd, but in this big old world, sometimes the thing that works out for us in the North Carolina room is just a Google search. Google Books is a tremendous treasure trove of material, and so don't underestimate what you may or may not be able to find with just a simple Google search. It probably shouldn't be where you begin, but it's worth doing. We found several different folks we were looking for by just doing a Google search. And this goes back to what I was saying about don't assume anything. Listen to what the sources are telling you. Especially when you're dealing with multiple generations of folks. We all know that folks like to name their children after themselves or their brothers or sisters or grandpas. And so really take a look at the source that you've got and make sure all those dates match for what you assume or what you think is going on. It's very easy to find a Sarah Gudger in Asheville. In fact, one of the issues that we had researching Sarah Gudger is that there are so many Sarah Gudgers. So we had to sort through all kinds of erroneous information to find the woman that we were really looking for. And some skills that you are really going to want are going to be those geography, deed reading, and map skills. A lot of the information that we learned about Sarah Gudger, we learned by reading the land deeds of her former masters and trying to pinpoint exactly where she was living. So you can get really good at reading those very specific deeds to find, here's where this creek meets that creek, and be able to look it up on a modern map. If you're interested in those types of documents, there's lots of different resources out there to teach you a little bit more about, what is a chain and what's a pole and that sort of thing. The biggest challenges in doing this type of research are the scarcity of resources or a paper trail. One of the things we'll talk about here in a second is that in order to learn more about Sarah, who was enslaved for the majority of her life, we had to use the resources or the sources that were related to the people who enslaved her. So though it may seem like there aren't a ton of paper resources out there, you've got to get creative about what you are looking for. Another issue we ran into is that post-emancipation, a lot of African American families moved all over the country in search of jobs, in search of their family members, and oftentimes this goes along with a change in name. A lot of folks chose to change their last name, whereas before they had used the surname of the person who enslaved them, and spelling. Anytime you're dealing with anyone from the 19th century, spelling is going to be an issue. Things just are more fluid as far as the ways that names were spelled. So that goes back to just keeping an open mind. One of the records we found for Sarah had been very badly misspelled, and it was Sawah, S-A-W-A-H. But she was living with a man named Smart near the Buncombe County line in McDowell County. So we felt pretty good about the assumption that we were looking at the right person. So what are the resources that are the most readily available? The Buncombe County Register of Deeds Bill of Sale database is a tremendous resource, but it should always be taken with a grain of salt. These are bills of sale discovered in the Buncombe County Register of Deeds collection that have been transcribed. I'll do this clunky screen share thing here again. Let's see. So here's the Buncombe County Register of Deeds Bill of Sale database. You can see that they have years recorded from 1776 to 1865, and there are 684 different documentations. If you scroll down, you'll see this wonderful list here, and it includes the book and page number. The thing to know about this is that this is not by any means all of the bills of sale for enslaved folks in Buncombe County or Western North Carolina. Each different county has their own Register of Deeds office. These same types of records are likely to be found there, but there were certainly more sales than 684. In fact, one of the ways we know this is by looking for one of the largest slave owners in Buncombe County, Nicholas Woodfin, is not listed on here but once. But we have documentation of the fact that he had purchased other slaves. So more often than not, these types of bills of sale are from or are between folks who are not as familiar with one another as they might like to be. What we see most often with enslaved folks in Western North Carolina is that they are traded between family members or close kin, and it's less often that they are sold at market in this way. So you can find some good stuff in here, but it's not everything. It's certainly not every bill of sale ever written in Buncombe County. So that Register of Deeds is a really good place to start. The US Census is obviously a great resource. You can find copies of the census on Ancestry.com. Right now, everyone with a Buncombe County Library card has access to Ancestry Library Edition, which is a really wonderful resource. They have basically all the same materials on that Ancestry Library Edition that they do on the full-fledged Ancestry. And then of course you can find copies of these things in your local archives. We have rolls and rolls and rolls of census film. Another great resource are newspapers. Here in the North Carolina room, we have access to newspapers.com, which is, I mean, it's kind of a miracle. There are hundreds of thousands, probably millions of pages of old news, and it's essentially scanned microfilm that you can then keyword search. So we'll take a quick look at newspapers.com here. You can purchase newspapers.com for yourself. I think I just renewed our membership. I think it is about $60 every 6 months. But if you were to come into the library, this is the account that you would use. And we'll just do, as an example, a quick search for Sarah Gudger. I always put names in these quotation marks because if I don't, the system is going to search for Sarah and for Gudger. So we won't find Sarah Gudger very easily. Put in my paper location down here, and then I like to leave the date range really open. So you just hit search. It'll load up for you. And here's a clipping that I actually was responsible for. So it'll point you toward the page where, or pages where your folks are listed. In this case, I was looking for Smart Gudger, who was Sarah's father, and I found him in the paper listed as a pauper in the county budget. So there he is. If you end up getting newspapers.com, I won't go super into it because that's going to be another program, but you find something you want, it's all just a matter of clipping and saving. So once the library opens back up, we will have access to this service. Another thing to keep in mind is that there are marriage and cohabitation records. You can sometimes find those via the Register of Deeds, but here in the North Carolina room, we have a little printed out version of these cohabitation records. These are folks who were married while enslaved and living together. And then there are other records later on that are, I don't know exactly the right word I'm looking for, but they're marriage certificates granted after the fact. So that's another collection of information that you can dig into. The last thing is the Freedmen's Bureau records. This is a treasure trove of information. The Freedmen's Bureau was a government organization set up at the end of the Civil War to help enforce emancipation. There was a Freedmen's Bureau office in Asheville, which served Western North Carolina, and there were other Freedmen's Bureau offices dotted all across the United States. We have access to some of these Freedmen's Bureau records via Family Search. The National Archives has made those available. Family Search is much like Ancestry, but it is it's managed and owned by the Church of Latter-day Saints. We have access to that here. You can also create a free account at home. But do know that all of the Freedmen's Bureau records are not available. I did, before we got started, I did a little bit of a search for Asheville and Buncombe County. Those don't seem to be up on the Freedmen's Bureau or on Family Search right now. But one thing that we are really interested in doing here in the North Carolina room as part of our Black Asheville History Project is purchasing the microfilm for the Asheville office of the Freedmen's Bureau, so that folks will have easier access to those. Right now, if you can't get to them on Family Search, the next place you would have to go is the National Archives Center in Atlanta. So we want to make those records more readily available. I think that there are about 5 rolls of film from the Asheville office. And if you're interested, our friends at the North Carolina room, I think, are going to start a campaign to have folks sponsor a roll of film. So if you're interested in that, or you know folks who might be interested in that, let me know. But I'll show you what they do have on the Freedmen's Bureau website on Family Search now. So when you go to familysearch.org, it'll prompt you to create a free account. After that, you can choose records and search for a specific collection of records. So I'm going to look for Freedmen's Bureau. Maybe. Let's see. We'll just look at DCs here. And you can see it gives you the opportunity to search. So we'll just search for a generic last name like Smith. Just to see what records it'll show us. And you can see here, it will give you the name. of the primary person on the record, any events, so the date of the record and where it happened, and if that particular record has a relationship to another record. The majority of the Freedmen's Bureau records, and we'll have somebody on, Steve Nash from ETSU is going to join us here soon to talk a little bit more about exactly what all you can find in the Freedmen's Bureau records. But a lot of these are letters to the field office, emancipated folks looking for their family members or looking for a recommendation for a job. So what's really nice about these Freedmen's Bureau records is that they are so rich in detail if you can find who you are looking for. I'm just going to check my chat real quick here. Yes, so the Library of Congress Chronicling America newspaper access is very similar to newspapers.com. Another similar service that you'll have access to with your library card at home is on NC Live, and it's called Historical North Carolina Newspapers. Unfortunately, the Citizen and the Times are not on there. So in order to see those papers that are still being published, you'll have to get a newspapers.com subscription. But if you're doing some work at the turn of the century or in the 19th century, you'll find plenty of sources on the historical North Carolina newspapers, and it works almost identical to newspapers.com. Okay, so besides those really readily available things, what all else is out there? So again, with our example of Sarah Gudger, there are oral histories. You may not have an oral history with someone who had lived during the same time as Sarah, but you might be able to find oral histories that recount family knowledge about those people. But be sure to look in the Federal Writers Project database. There are tons, thousands, I think, of interviews with enslaved folks or formerly enslaved folks, and they allow you to search the interviews for names, places, and different information. So those keyword searchable interviews are great. Similarly, on our catalog, the North Carolina Room catalog, you can search within oral history transcripts. So if there's a transcript connected to a particular oral history and you do a quick keyword search, and we'll show that in just a second, it will also search within the transcript of the oral history. So that's something to keep in mind. Manuscript records, a lot of families have different kinds of materials housed in archives just like ours. This could be the materials left by the African American family, or more often you'll find collections from large families that had been slave owners before. So, you know, in our one good example that I like to give is at Chapel Hill. The Nicholas Woodfin collection at Chapel Hill is very rich in resources related to his owning of slaves. There are even in that collection some letters written by an enslaved man who had been sent to California to work during the gold rush. So that's a really cool collection. But that's a good example of one that is very rich in resources related to enslaved folks. Church records are another really important piece of documentation for us. And these can be churches, especially in the early part of the 19th century, these can be churches that are white churches. Oftentimes, enslaved folks were made honorary members, or they're listed on a roll as the servant of another church member. But Baptist churches in particular kept impeccable records. Every meeting had minutes. And what you'll find in those minutes sometimes are obituaries for enslaved people. So a good example in Buncombe County is the Flat Creek Baptist Church records. They've been abstracted and they're available here, and I'm sure there's a copy at Old Buncombe Genealogical Society in their library. But there are 5 or 6 different obituaries for enslaved people in those records. So those church records are really valuable. Military records, in order to research another gentleman from Buncombe County, his name was George Avery, we've used military records on Ancestry.com that are originally from the National Archives. So if you find out that you are looking for an individual that may have been involved in the Civil War or some other conflict, the National Archives and Ancestry Service Fold 3 are really great for that, and we have access to Fold 3 here in the library. Historic sites are great places for you to inquire. If you think that you've got a research question that might apply to a specific historic site, most are so happy to help you in that way. So I'm going to give a shout out to Vance Birthplace here locally. The Zebulon Vance Birthplace out in Weaverville has done so much in the past 5 years to reinterpret their site and refocus their story back on the folks who had been enslaved there. So you'll find that at a lot of different historic sites that in the past few years, they've really put an effort into documenting and interpreting the lives of enslaved people. So Vance Birthplace is one here locally. Another one that I can think of is the Reed Gold Mine out closer to Charlotte. Those would be a couple of different places where you might look. But if you're looking for someone who is outside of Buncombe County or outside of Western North Carolina, certainly just find your local historic society and get in touch. Cemeteries are another huge way to learn more information about folks. We've been working together with the keepers of the Violet Hill Cemetery in West Asheville to index and record the headstones that are there, as well as scan in their cemetery ledgers, because oftentimes folks may not have any other record of their life than a headstone. So that's definitely something that's very important. Then there's lots of important work going around that right now in Buncombe County. The South Asheville Cemetery Association, where George Avery is buried, they have done tremendous work over the past, I guess it's 20 years, correct me if I'm wrong, Ellen, to uncover and clean up that cemetery. There are things in the works right now to do similar work at the Alexander Chapel Baptist Church in Leicester, which was also the home of an African-American school. So these cemeteries are a great way to find that most basic vital information. And my last point here is more. Is there more out there? We hope there's more out there. We just have to keep on searching. I know that there are endless amounts of wonderful material that would help folks researching African Americans in Western North Carolina hiding out in basements all across the region. Basements and attics and shoeboxes and under the bed. This information is out there, and like I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, that is one of our strategic goals for the North Carolina Room over the next 5 years, is to bring the number of resources we have for folks in the African American community up to at least 25% of our entire collection. And I'll show you, we do have some things here now. Get back to, there we go. So if you visit ncroom.buncombecounty.org, this is what you'll see at the top. And if you'll scroll down, you'll see this finding aid to our African American collections. These are just direct links to specific collections. So one that might be really helpful to folks who are researching families in Asheville is this Ruth Jackson Cannon collection. So I'll just click on that. and you'll be able to read the description of the collection. Let's say you were looking for someone with a particular last name. Like I mentioned, you can just do a keyword search. So we could just search for, I'll choose a common McDowell. And that'll pull up anything and everything that has the word McDowell in it somewhere. So let's say I wanted just oral histories about McDowell. I could click that oral history button. And there we go. So you can read through some of these oral histories here. So another big thing that I wanted to drive home today as a part of this is, what are you going to do with the research that you find? In particular, if you are like me and you're interested in African American history, what should I, as a white person, do with this stuff? Well, first of all, anybody can donate their research. We have folks coming in to look at family genealogy write-ups all the time, and we love to take them. They're really super helpful to anyone doing any kind of family history. So donate your research to either someone like us or the Old Buncombe Genealogical Society. You can also volunteer with those different organizations, an organization that that means a lot to you, that you're really interested in. Like I mentioned before, we were doing these history harvests, and these are essentially events where we invite the community to bring in their archival materials, and we scan them and send them back within the same day. So having folks who are happy to help scan and talk to people about their materials, that's a huge need for a lot of different archives. But I'm going to, shameless self-promotion right now, us especially. You can use the information that you find to do some type of commemoration. The picture on this slide here is the unveiling of an interpretive sign at the Tempe Avery Community Center, which was recently rededicated after research on the part of a library patron and one of Tempe's descendants. They ended up placing a headstone for her and renaming the community center in Montford, which sits on the property she once owned after her. Another example is out in Riceville. A family who owned a piece of property found out that an enslaved man had been buried somewhere on their property. They didn't know where, but they did all they could to learn more about him, and then eventually created a headstone near the other small family cemetery on their property. So George, who was called George the Tanner, George has a headstone now. And then, of course, I mentioned the work at the South Asheville Cemetery, but they have some great interpretive signage there about Sarah Gudger and George Avery. And then, of course, doing cemetery cleanup, creating accessibility to these records. What can we do to ensure that folks can find the things that they're interested in or that they're looking for? And, of course, recognition that we have the records, that we don't have enough records, and that we'd like to find more. So that's something that these are all different types of things that you can do with the information that you might find. You don't have to do anything with it. It could be something that you want to create for just yourself and your family and cherish it, and that's perfectly okay too. But just know, if you ever do need a home for it, we're always interested. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Do we have any questions? Like I said, you can type them into the chat, or you can use that hand raise function and let me know you'd like to speak out loud. Thank you, Liz, for coming. We always like to have folks we know hanging out with us. The North Carolina Room is really dedicated to this particular project and ensuring that we build up our African American collections. So I'm looking for hands raised. Anybody else? Oh, I see. Hi there.
Hey, thank you so much for hosting this. This has been wonderful. I've learned so much. Thank you. My question is, if I'm taking an oral history from someone, I have someone in mind. There's a woman, I don't know if you know Blue. He is, he comes to the art room at the Haywood Church right there all the time. And his mother is called the Queen of Hillcrest. He always refers to her as. She was one of the original African Americans that moved in to that neighborhood. And the next time when COVID is over, I'd like to connect with him. I've made a relationship with him, and I'd like to get his oral history and the mother's. What is the process I should do in order to like document it? Do I video? What is process?
Right. Wow, that's a great question. Unfortunately, we were going to have some oral history trainings back in March and April, but we had to cancel those. My recommendation to you right now to get prepared for something like that is go check out the Southern Oral History program at Chapel Hill. And they have a wonderful guide called A Practical Guide to Oral History. And it's about 25 pages long, I guess, but it has some information about best practices and what the proper release forms and things look like. But once you're ready to do that, do let us know, and we can provide you with release forms and all of those things that we know are good to go. So thank you. Anybody else? Oh. Hey, honey, how are you?
Oh, I'm good. Sorry, I didn't. I was just trying to figure out how to do this.
Oh, okay.
I was just wondering, I'm sure this is going to be accessible after we get off the call, like all the information that you've been posting and the links and everything. But I had a quick question about, so you were talking about how often, don't assume, keep researching and digging into things. Is it oftentimes like that you find a lot of information? Obviously it makes sense because after slaves were released, they spread out. Those are the things that you have found? Do you think there's a lot more out there in regards to like things that are directed back to Asheville or to North Carolina in general?
Yes, I think that there are plenty of things out there. We just haven't necessarily found them yet. The thing I mentioned at UMass Amherst was a total fluke. We just happened upon it one day. And that goes back to my mention of just doing a quick Google search. It may not seem like the most academic thing to do, but that's how I found those records at UMass Amherst.
Okay.
Because I was looking for a particular person and got frustrated and couldn't find them. So I just Googled their name, and lo and behold, there it was. So I think that there are lots of other materials there, and don't give up on the National Archives or the Library of Congress. There's so much material in there. So you don't have to look locally. Definitely keep an open mind. Look.
Is there just a disconnect, you think, on connecting those things found in because obviously if you're finding it at UMass, it's documented, somebody did it, is there just a disconnect of getting the information to you guys here in Asheville, or do you think it's just not a priority, or what do you think of that?
In that particular collection, I would think that it's just not a priority. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of individual records in the W.E.B. Du Bois collection. And I just don't think that while they were scanning all of that, they thought, you know what, let's make sure we find the local history room in Asheville and let them know what we've got. So yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff out there like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna go, Ellen had her hand up here first.
Hey, I just wanted to, going off of Honey's question, there is a really great new sort of in progress project from the University of Minnesota libraries called Umbra Search. And I'm going to put the link in the chat so that it's easy. It's umbrasearch.org once you know how to spell Umbra Search. But they are starting to collect. They've got over 700,000 items, and what they've done is they've gone in and scraped the catalogs for archives, libraries, and museums all over the place. Now, it's not comprehensive. My students, when they were going through our local archives for things on African American women, for a project that Catherine and I are working on, they found a lot of things that were not in Umbra Search yet, but it's a really cool tool that we need to pay attention to as a community, all of us, because at some point they're also going to have a tool that will allow us to contribute to, sort of, it's a they want to create a crowdsource tool so that we can contribute items that aren't in their collection already. So it is something that we'll want to search now and then pay attention to for later, because we can contribute to that bank of knowledge also. So I'm going to put the link to Umbra Search in the chat for anybody who's interested.
Awesome. Thank you, Ellen. Lydia, you were next. Go ahead, Lydia.
Yeah, thanks. Well, two things. One, Honey just got booted off the call, but I will share the Umbra Search thing with her. And then I'm wondering about the white lens of record keeping, and especially oral histories. So, like, as I'm sure all of us have been in the situation where we're listening to an interview or reading an interview, and like the questions that the interviewer is asking are not aligned with the story of the person that they're interviewing. And I'm curious about how our readings of especially oral histories, but also records, can be like filtered through the white lens without assuming too much about the record keeping practices. And also, I know I'm not on the video, I'm a white woman, and I do a lot of work like around social and racial and language justice, but I'm still a white woman facilitating that. So, like, yeah, like how do we use the records thoughtfully and also act in the best interests of record keeping as white people?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's an awesome
That's
question.
a big question.
Yeah, so I'll use Sarah Gudger, my example for this again. Sarah's interview, based on what we understand from newspaper accounts, the interviewer, the Federal Writers Project interviewer, was, I think she was white, best we can tell, and she spent all day with Sarah, all day long, like 12 hours. And what we have from that is like a 15-page written transcript in I dialect. So we know that what we're reading there is only the gist of what Sarah would have said, and that it's definitely taken through the I dialect lens. Like, you just look at it, and a lot of people will have a hard time getting over that. So one of the things that we did with that project was, rather than reinterpreting the words from the oral history transcript, we just used a snipping tool and snipped them out and said, here's what it looks like on the source. This is what the source says. But when it comes to the North Carolina room doing any kind of oral history, what we've tried to do with the Black Asheville History Project is crowdsource questions from folks who come to programs. And that's something we're working on right now, and then run those questions by other community stakeholders. The biggest part of that is emphasizing that we want the Black Asheville History Project to be a community-driven project. I would so much rather a woman of color interview one of her elders, and then she transcribe it and we get the interview back from them, than for me to go out and interview somebody who I have a very, okay, just an acquaintanceship with. It's so much better. You get so many more quality interviews, and that goes for any kind of community-driven archiving. We've done that with the Fairview community. So we really want to develop questions with the folks who we might be interviewing or who would be doing the interviewing, and then run those by community members, because that's the only way that we can, I won't say ensure, but push toward a better interview. That even if, I do end up doing the interview, I've got this set of questions in front of me that are questions that community members want to have answered. So did that answer that?
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And also just like the notion of like stakeholders driving the conversation rather than like asking questions in the moment, but actually letting that question development phase be a part of it ahead of time is really, really interesting. And I hadn't thought about it like that too. So yeah, thank you, Catherine.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna go with
All right. Hello again.
Hello again. All right, two-part question. First one is, I'm interested in the history of the Freemasons in this town and their involvement in the African-American culture. And so I was wondering if we have a wide breadth of information that they have given, or books or something, and specifically also the Order of the Rainbow, how they treated their teenagers as a Freemason group, since I know that was part of that slave ownership time period, possibly. Do we have records from that? And then the second question is, when I was in Lakeland, I went to their archives in Florida, and they had women's groups, all the local women's groups that were there. They had their photo albums and things like that. Do we have that in the room?
So I'll answer the second question first. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got lots of different community club kinds of materials.
Okay.
And another huge collection of that kind of thing is at the Western Regional Archives. It's the Black Mountain Women's Club scrapbooks. We have some, but it's not nearly as big and comprehensive as the WRA has. And a lot of ours are digital, so they don't physically exist in the archive.
Okay.
Your first question was about the African American Freemasons in this area. We have a little bit, but it's certainly not comprehensive. Basically what we have are, building sites and maybe the names of some, whatever the person in charge at the Freemasons is called, but we don't have a lot of records. Something that might be helpful that we do have are city directories, which has, interestingly enough, all of the secret societies listed in the city directory, and who's in charge, who the contact would have been at a certain point in time. So,
okay.
Let's see. I always forget when I get started. 1883. 1883 is our earliest city directory. And those are also available online at archive.org, but it's a little cumbersome to try to look through them that way.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, well, is there anybody else? Awesome. Oh. MK?
Yes, so I know it's a bit difficult now with social distancing and COVID, quarantine, all that sort of stuff happening, but what are the ways that we can get in contact with the NC room or volunteering to help physically scan and work on projects?
Yeah. So if you want to get in touch with the North Carolina room, there are several different ways. So if you have your pen and paper ready, the easiest way is by emailing us. Our sort of catch-all email for everyone in the room is PACK, P-A-C-K, NC at buncombecounty.org. The next way is on our social media. Our Facebook is North Carolina Room at Pack Memorial Library, and our Instagram handle and Twitter handle is at AVL History. The last way is by going to our NC Room catalog database webpage, and the address for that is ncroom.buncombecounty.org. And if anybody's not local, Buncombe is spelled Buncombe. Okay. All right. Anything else? Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. This was really fun. We're going to keep on doing it. Next week is going to be a tour of the North Carolina room. I'm not sure if I'm going to do it live or not. I think I'll pre-record it and have some time for question and answer. But we're looking forward to seeing you all again soon when you can actually come to the library. But in the meantime, please stay in touch. All right. Thanks, everyone.